At a high level, we want to go through the path to digital transformation. So talking about something for the engineer, something for the architect, and then finally closing out something for the executive, because any digital transformation, it covers all three of these areas, and it's good, all different departments. So then we'll close out with some open questions from the audience. And Rob, you want to kind of talk about the engineering level, how your company is transforming DevOps?
I guess when we talk about DevOps, everybody has a slight different or a kind of different interpretation or either definition of it. DevOps is actually, it's more of a culture than it is anything else, but traditionally DevOps, when initially was thought of, was something to do with orchestration of existing cloud services. And so now it's taken on this thought process of around, developing a culture within your organization where you're continuously improving services to your clients, and by continually improvement in services, you're fostering an environment to sort of build out a DevOps culture. So I guess ultimately what that means is that when you embark on a cloud journey, that and especially from an engineering perspective, that what you try to do is you try to foster an environment. You look at automating, orchestrating what you currently do today. By doing that, you're encouraged to work with to basically foster an environment that develops this so-called DevOps culture. And so, when I refer to that, it's in my opinion, it comes from that perspective, and you see that within enterprises, and I've seen it within various enterprises I work with over the years.
So what would you say are some of the differences between traditional DevOps and cloud DevOps?
Well, interesting enough, when I first started looking at the DevOps within the context of going to the cloud, my understanding was, when I was working with other engineers, that they were looking at how they would take the traditional manual process things that they were driving, and then trying to find a way to automate that process, and therefore taking the development aspect of the operational things that they were doing and driving out this whole DevOps as a function. Now my opinion has changed a little, because where the value really starts becoming evident is long after you start automating, you've now developed and fostered an environment where everybody is thinking the same way. They're all thinking about, how do I automate what I've been traditionally doing manually, and basically getting rid of that, I guess that phrase I use around the blue-collar IT working experience, where that traditional method of working no longer sort of holds true, because the idea is that you want to try and obviously eliminate the manual things that you've been doing in your life to free you up to be a little bit more innovative. So take the administrative out, put in the innovative, and that's when you start really, seeing the difference between the traditional DevOps and moving into the world of the true DevOps culture that hopefully most organizations are trending towards.
Yeah, I would say, I've got a question for you. Besides developers, of course, has DevOps have helped any particular department at your firm? Security, infrastructure, what have you?
I guess less about the departments, more about what the business benefit has been in all that. And I guess it comes back to the hunger for most clients today to have a continued improvement in service or quality of service. And so being able to be agile and move through things quite quickly is where we see the benefits, and that literally goes across every department. Everybody wins in the end. So if you would ask me what my main observations would be looking at these departments and seeing that now that they can move quicker and be more tactical and more agile by doing that, because of the underlying environment that you're fostering within this DevOps type mechanism. So
a lot of the times it can be a difficult sell to go the DevOps route. It's a cultural shift. It's you have to learn new tools, you have to learn new processes. Were there any difficult sells that you had to make for your executives or your architectural teams to go the DevOps route?
It's interesting you ask that question, because what happens is that initially you get some resistance, but the thing is, what actually happens is that you notice that once people start seeing the benefits of cloud and the automation, orchestration, and the migration of the applications, yes, there is a steep learning curve, and yes, there is always a risk of the business transformation side of things. That is, people have to learn new tools, capabilities, the way they traditionally do their work changes. it is quite disruptive, but long term the benefits are there. And so so when talking to leadership and executives and the like, from an engineering perspective, the message that you really want to get out is that, hey, the learning curve is steep initially, but the reward is quite large further down the track. And I guess I speak from experience because I see the benefits of being able to go to market so much quicker in a very short period of time because of that. So, that should be the message, that don't expect Rome to be built in a day, but at the same time, if you can see that their long-term benefits are quite sizable, that when you get that message across and get the buy-in, then you should at least start having some quick wins initially with some long-term, strategic goals established that hopefully executive will believe in and support you in, because that is probably one of the main drivers that you need to make this happen.
That is huge to have a supportive executive team, somebody that believes in you. But do you think that where are you sort of on that bell curve of or hockey stick of difficulty? Are you realizing full benefits yet, or are you in the middle of the curve, or where do you are?
Yeah, working at a previous company as well, we actually measured those sort of benefits. So I used to tell people that the only way that you can really sort of demonstrate the benefits of what you're trying to do is to actually capture it within the data. So if you turn around and say, oh, look, traditionally I used to deliver services within a week, and that was, equivalent to maybe 8 hours a day, et cetera, that equates to a figure, an FTE head count figure. It could be, time and materials, et cetera. When you say then, oh, now we bring it down to a day, then now you've been able to measure the benefits of what you're doing. So, long story short, from my observations, I had actually observed, especially in the previous business I was working in, that, you would see that here we have these traditional engineers and developers doing this work, and now, the traditional 1 week has come down to 1 day, and now they've got 4 days to do other things. And that's when they start thinking about, oh, wow, this DevOps culture is happening because now I'm trying to improve other, stuff that I would consider remedial or administrative and annoying, and therefore now I have time to suggest to my leadership and others, or to my manager that, hey, look, can we invest some time in improving this particular area? So these are the things you witness firsthand, especially when you start, addressing what DevOps culture means, because that in its essence is what you start seeing. And for us along that hockey stick or that curve is, I consider myself quite further down that track than most. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a lot of battle scars and wounds to show on the back of that because of mistakes along the way and the things that you learn. So nothing's perfect, but what the idea is that you've got to acknowledge it's there, and you've got to acknowledge a way forward on how you want to get there, and also get the message across to leadership on what the benefits of getting to that sort of level of automation, orchestration, DevOps culture type facilitation within your organization.
Yeah. A lot of the time, in any cloud transformation, you'll see a question of infrastructure, platform, or software as a service. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times, you're looking at starting out with infrastructure as a service. To what extent was infrastructure automation part of your transformation?
This is a very good question, and this will be, I think, a challenge for everybody who haven't already jumped on this whole thing. So, you have IaaS, you have PaaS, and you have SaaS-based, platform service offerings. And the thing is that depending on your organization, not everything sort of suits a particular type of platforms. For example, you may find that, hey, your leadership tells you want to get out of a data center tomorrow. Like, okay, so you do an assessment of the applications and you realize that some of the applications just won't move to anything else other than an IaaS-related platform. That means it needs something up to the operating system. And so what that means is that there is a need to move some workloads to IaaS, but at the same time, you're really not benefiting you're not really leveraging the benefits of cloud if you don't seriously look at what platform as a service gives you, or, aka PaaS. So you can start looking at some of those applications in your data center and say, hey, manager, director, leader, we see, at 20% of our data center workloads that are really good candidates for PaaS, and it would be silly just to move them to IaaS in a cloud, and therefore we're putting in recommendations that on the back of the nature of the application that, PaaS could be a solution. So there is no right or wrong. You can do IaaS, you can do PaaS, you can do hybrid. Every organization is different. It's just I guess where the secret sauce is really understanding what applications you have in your data center, what do you want to move, why do you want to move it, and what is the business benefit to move those. So if you can get that right and then start putting things in buckets and saying these apps could be IaaS, these apps could be PaaS, these are SaaS, and maybe some will be sunsetted, then that at least gives your organization visibility of what the next 12, 18, 24 months could look like.
Yeah, that actually transitions pretty nicely into a bit of IP that 10th Magnitude has been developing. I guess this kind of goes across something for the engineer and something for the architect, but we've developed a Power BI dashboard that lets our engineers and our architects look at a portfolio of applications and determine how should we shift what our applications are doing today, and how should we shift to where they could be in the cloud. I'd actually like to switch over a little bit to a screen share, and let me know if you guys can see this, but this is a Power BI dashboard, and of course this is all demo data, but this is an example of some data that we pulled in and kind of masked and manipulated a little bit to be abstracted, but how can you look at a portfolio of applications and figure out, based on some quantitative data, what should be modernized, what should be migrated, or which applications should you sunset or leave on them, and how do you figure out what the applications will look like? Well, if you have a list of applications like we do on say a set of application servers, you can figure out based on some quantitative data, are they running running Java processes, .NET processes, what types of applications are they, or other OSs. We basically pull in all this data and try and figure out where should your applications go. Of course, this isn't an immediate switch, it's a goal to set in your mind. And you can figure out, application by application, where your applications can go. And of course, this is an automated process. Is it 100% accurate? No, but it's a great gut check to figure out, okay, I've got a good idea of where my applications are going and where they could go. Is this something that you think has been helpful to you?
Yeah, because to be honest, as you start, scratching the surface of, what it is to go to cloud, if you haven't gone to cloud already, very quickly it becomes evident that, oh, look, we've got cloud, we've done some level of orchestration or automation, but now we've got all these applications that we want to move. And so, looking at it from a traditional method, you'd get an Excel spreadsheet, you would export maybe your CMDB or your asset management list of things that you have, and then try to go one by one line item of every application that you have and try to categorize or work something out with that. Very painful, takes a lot of time, and doesn't necessarily reap the rewards that you would be looking for, especially in today's world. So having the ability to get some of that data presented in a way that's visual, and then being able to at least group the applications that you have within your data center into certain buckets of what's good to migrate, what's good to modernize. I guess it comes back to those 4 or 5 R's about, do you rebuild it, do you refactor it, do you repurpose it, revise it, etc. All those things that you have as options to what you want to do with that app. You really, in this day and age, you really don't get a lot of wins of just moving an app. Sometimes you are limited because you just have to move the app, but when you see it presented in a way that says, here are some quick wins, then you would target some of those ones in the dashboard that you see in front of you, and you say, let's go with those quick wins now, get some momentum, let leadership benefit into the ground, and we're doing it into the cloud, and we're doing it in an accelerated fashion, rather than look at an Excel spreadsheet and use your traditional blue-collar IT thinking to try and get that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think another kind of twist on this view is that we've kind of transformed a little bit into what we call a service management map, and we're able to say, using the same data, of course, down to the different types of applications we're looking at. So, applications, system center, IS, any website is a very good candidate for PaaS. Percent match. It's at least a high probability candidate. The applications you're looking at, probably ignoring some of these ones at the bottom because economies of scale. You work better in high numbers. Have you noticed any applications in particular that you've identified as candidates for modernization in your experience?
Look, for us, we work, I guess, and most of the enterprise that I've worked for work in the space of data and dealing with data, and so databases for us is quite important. And so for us, whenever we see anything with a SQL type database, presenting data back to some front-end web server or something. For us, we jump at things like that to try and move away from the traditional SQL Server, for instance, type solution. So for us, that's probably been the most important because, bread and butter for most of the enterprise I work for have been around that particular space. So others may see the same, but then others may play in different sort of database worlds as well. But from my experiences, that's pretty much what I've seen as the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have you noticed any particular product wins in Azure or cloud for data? Data warehousing, data transformation, any of these areas?
Data warehousing, yes, but again, still scratching the surface within that, so I can't really talk too much about that particular subject. But again, you can get quite lost in the availability of services within cloud. I mean, and if we just talk Azure, that's one thing. If you start stepping out beyond Azure, to the likes of AWS, there is too much, maybe almost too much going on, if you could say that. And
it'll change tomorrow.
And it will change tomorrow. So you must be mindful of that, if anything.
All right. Very cool. So, got a question. Have you had any interactions with the compliance department in your moves to the cloud, at the architectural level?
Yeah, so they've been involved from day dot, because when you look at a cloud ecosystem, and I guess something that we had developed even in the previous enterprise that I've worked for was looking at building out a cloud ecosystem. That is, the cloud ecosystem consists of these modules. You have compliance and standards in part of that ecosystem. You have service delivery. You have things like business services or commercial services where the subscription and contractual agreements for those cloud services exist. You have security services to make sure that everything that's going into the cloud meets all their security standards that they had provisioned.
Yep.
So you start seeing quite quickly this cloud ecosystem that you build out, and there are frameworks for that to sort of identify. And again, bringing it back to the point of governance and compliance, that's in the top left-hand corner, and in there it talks about what are the ISO standards that you're looking for? What is the data protection that you're looking for? What exactly is the compliance and governance that your organization looks for before you even put that application in the cloud? And so you have to bring them along from day one, because once you actually get the endorsement and support from that particular area of the business, and it's meeting a lot of those regulatory requirements, and then it makes the transition that much more easier. As you start stepping through some of the stuff that you showed even on the dashboard, some of the important things that you would need to consider is actually things like data sovereignty and stuff like that, because sometimes it's not just a matter of being able to move an app. You may want to ask yourself, hey, can we actually move the app in the first place? Because we may be constrained by some of the legalities of that particular app, and you want to put that in a bucket too.
Yeah. This
app can't move, or this app may remain on-prem. And so, that's sharing some of my experiences within that space.
Yeah, absolutely. In particular in the data management area, since you said there are a lot of quick wins there, or a lot of that's where a lot of the draw is for compliance. Were there any particular hurdles that you had to get through in terms of importing your data into the cloud or migration?
Yeah, so some enterprises don't actually have a good data classification established in the enterprise, so that can be a bit of a challenge in itself. So, sometimes you don't have the right taxonomy. So you may say this particular app that sits in this database has this data and it's tagged as cannot move, or it's tagged as can sit in the cloud. Some enterprises don't actually have that level of sophistication put in place for their, management of data, and that's fine. I think most enterprises fall into that space, unfortunately. And so what you will find is that you need to there are some manual touch points within that as you start talking to the business owners and say, hey, your application has been flagged to move. What can you tell me about the data, and how does that relate back to the legalities of moving that data? That in itself, I think, is always going to be a challenge. I don't know how easy and automated you can do that, because you've still got these touch points that are there. And so from my experience, it's a matter of sitting down with business owners and having that discussion, saying, hey, look, what can you tell me about the data? And sometimes, they don't even know. So they have to go back and do their research, and they have to talk to, the developers and the people that are managing the actual application, and also the application owners, to work out what best to do with that.
I'd say that goes back to even the DevOps forum, where it can be a cultural change. Some of the things and processes you go through. That's a great point. Switching back over, inadvertently, I think we've already gone through something for the architect, but wanted to touch on how you can actually figure out something for the executive. So we've kind of talked architecturally. How do you move what? How do you classify your data? talked about the engineering, the DevOps level, the automation. Were there any particular executive pushes that you needed to make in order to sell your executives on cloud?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been probably in this game for about probably 7 or 8 years in terms of from the inception of, hey, look, I've got an idea, I want to move to the cloud and I want to now get buy-in to where we are today in these various organizations I've worked for. And so you cannot survive and you will not progress and you will not get where you need to get without executive sponsorship. That's probably on top of my food chain in terms of what you need. And the idea is that if you do not get executive sponsorship, then it's very hard because of the level of investment and time and effort it would take to migrate and move into the cloud. And therefore, you have to really demonstrate the financial benefits, the return on investment, and benefits of what you will get. And some of them are tangible and some are not. That is, hey, we're going to start developing DevOps because we're leveraging cloud and this automation orchestration capability. How do you put a price on that? How do you put a figure on that? And therefore, you need to come up with a good approach to leadership about, hey, let's just put the bottom line out of the way for a second. Let's talk about what that fosters for us in an organization and how long-term that's going to benefit us. That's one. But if you want to get into the weeds, then that's another thing in itself. So some recommendations could be around, hey, traditionally, my engineers that have been working for me spend 5 hours a week just building servers, for instance. Okay, great. Well, what if I can tell you that I no longer need to do 95 hours a week to build servers? I can probably use probably 5 hours of that engineer's time, and then the other 90s we can do something else with. And as you start sort of presenting this information and telling them, look, if you want to use things like IaaS in the cloud, then all we're managing is up to the operating system. If you want to go one better, we want to use PaaS services, well, we're just actually presenting an application back to the consumer. So you're taking away a lot of the traditional, we need to patch or we need to, do upgrades or whatever, because this is all handled by the service that you're obviously getting from the cloud provider. Now, this may be obvious to some that are on the line and not so to others, but in effect, what you're trying to present out is, here are some benefits about the level of automation and orchestration and the time it will give us back to free us up to be innovative, because to be honest, to survive in today's market is that level of innovation needs to be aggressive and it needs to be quick. And the only way you can do that is not by throwing more headcount at it or more FTEs, full-time engineers or the likes, but it's more about, how do I get my existing, workforce to work more efficiently and more effectively? And that will come out in the numbers if you can present them in a way to leadership accordingly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, a lot of the times in any cloud transformation, you can, if you don't have that top level buy-in, it could almost be a question: are we actually doing this? Setting an enterprise strategy like cloud needs to be top down, and need to have that buy-in.
It needs to be in your business strategy. It needs to be in your IT strategy as well. It's that important that just from my experience, I've seen it fail so many times, and it's because of that main reason. You just don't have the sponsorship and support, because from a budget perspective, and from an endorsement perspective, you need to have that. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that you do it in a way that's ineffective, or it's cheap, or you may even shoot yourself in the foot because you say, hey, look, I'll do it for this amount. Yeah. Go off and try and do it, and it's all bandaged together, and then you have a poor experience, and then you lose your sponsorship because they say, well, what's this? We just wasted this money and it didn't give us what we wanted, and that's because you just probably did not sell it the best way you could initially, because you got to do it properly, you got to spend the money, you got to invest the time and the resources and get the focus to do that. Otherwise, what happens is, it comes back and bites you in the foot. So you have to be careful on how you go about doing that.
Absolutely. And I think that pulls us a little bit to the question of how do you get that executive buy-in? And I would say, surprise, surprise, it probably starts out with numbers. And Magnitude has done a really great job of pulling together some dashboards and visualizations to drive those numbers. A lot of the times it starts from your portfolio inventory and your server inventory. And actually, I'm going to switch it over to another screen share. To a cloud adoption dashboard that we've developed that lets you look at application by application, what would your cloud consumption cost be, and what's it going to take you to perform this cloud adoption. If you can imagine that over here on the right, these are your applications. Of course, they're generic names, application server, but what's it going to cost to migrate application X into the cloud? And it looks like, at a run cost of about 2.7 million, this application server grouping, or if you want to just move something smaller in your databases and look at, 1.3 million. Well, you look at this dashboard as a whole, 1 million's a tough buy-in right away. Well, Power BI helps us kind of narrow that scope down and figure out, bit by bit what I might want to do. Do I want to break off a chunk at a time? Or at the same time, it gives us the ability to figure out, are there any OS upgrades that we need? And it looks like this client is pretty well off. Out of 5,500 servers total, they only need 7 OS upgrades. So this client's in a very lucky position. I would say most clients are not in this lucky position, but again, this is demo data. So we've also broken it down to the point where you can figure out what are the costs of running your environments, your separate environments. So if you just wanted to, test out moving your QA environment, well, you can look at that and see what the cost of that might be and see how that affects, various applications. And you can also, based on some of the experience that we've had figuring out, what does it actually cost to migrate a virtual machine, can figure out, what that migration, rough order of magnitude, what that would look like, and kind of walk through those numbers. Something like this, is that something that would sell, that has sold your executives?
Well, I mean, not just executives. I guess it helps also understand, even from an engineering and architecture perspective, how much is it costing to actually run your workloads versus the potential costs versus optimized costs. So, if you think that some of your workloads in your data centers are running suboptimal or even beyond the over provision, for instance, you have an opportunity to clean all that out and sort of present that in a cloud service provider with a smaller footprint and still deliver the performance that you need for your clients and for that particular service. So having the ability to sort of make sure that the costs add up by looking at how your actual data center currently operates versus how it would look like in the cloud actually really helps get the message across. I think that's also an important thing. And again, it comes back to the Excel example I mentioned earlier. It's, you can do this all in Excel and it can be quite crude, or you can use, Power BI capability to try and really present it in a way that an executive could understand or possibly consume it better. I think that's some of the wins that you can get out of presenting the information in that regard.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the biggest insights I've seen happen, or one of the insights I've seen happen most often, is that when we as a consulting team go in and try and gather this information, usually it's not this clean. It doesn't have, a name for each application workload. Normally what happens is there are a bunch of, smaller chunks, and then there's maybe one large chunk that's maybe the size of this area, and it just says blank or unknown, and it pushes a customer to realize that a lot of the times they don't even know what the hell's in their data centers, or they haven't classified it. They don't have it as part of their databases or VM Center. It's not tagged properly, and getting to the point where they actually know what they're running has been a large challenge. Is that a challenge for you or something that you can identify with?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a challenge for everyone anyway. And the cleansing of the actual data and making sure that, the way the taxonomy has been done for the workloads that reside in there and how honest that information is in itself a challenge. And therefore, being able to present that information back in a way that is readable, let alone being able to do something with it effectively and present back to various elements of the business is always going to be critical. And so you're only as good as your data, and it's important to actually make sure that is the case, especially again when it's not branded the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a question that is, how do you estimate the cost of redoing a legacy system? Isn't that needed to justify the business case? I have an answer. What would you say?
Okay, so this comes back to those maybe 4 or 5 R's. Do you do you decide on rebuilding? No, actually, do you do a lift and shift? You know, do you decide on rebuilding? Do you want to rehost it? Do you want to revise it? You know, you have a whole bunch of options. So depending on the type of application you're talking about, you know, like it could be something like a .NET or a Java-based application, and you may say, oh, that's a good candidate to move to a PaaS type solution. Go speak to the business owners and say, have you factored in X amount of dollars to try and, you know, factor in your next budget cycle of moving this application, but not just moving it, you actually basically redoing the whole app. Again, it comes back to that assessment of, you know, you're putting your apps in certain buckets and then you're making recommendations based on the actual applications themselves and coming up with a figure to do that. And so some of this automation that you see, or some of this stuff that you see within a dashboard helps that, because you can isolate to that particular legacy application, and by clicking on it, it will just auto update the dashboard, and then from there you're able to understand the application a little bit better. And then say, look, it currently costs us X amount now, and it could cost us maybe the same in the cloud, but what we've done is now taken the responsibility of owning the infrastructure or the tin underneath it, because it's sitting in a PaaS type, you know, platform.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say that when I've kind of seen this analysis done, I would say the question isn't usually what does it cost to do the migration or to do the transformation. The way I've seen the question phrased is really what is the benefit? How is this going to transform the business? And of course, you know, at the end of the day, it is going to come down to dollars and cents. How do we justify this decision? And normally what I've seen it be is an acceleration of time to market, or an acceleration of how you can meet your customers' needs. And those are kind of how the dollars and cents are answered. Getting those numbers can be an estimate sometimes, and it can be, you know, depending on the customer, it could even be a gut feel. Yeah,
look, to be honest, even from my experiences, those numbers are just an indication. If you think that you're going to go to, you know, within $100 of what the actual value is, you will be wrong. But what at least you want to do is, if you think that, you know, moving it to the cloud, that you're going to save money, it's not necessarily always the case. You may, through optimization, be able to reduce your footprint of the application and save some money, yes, potentially. But then these unforeseen costs around, well, now that we're fostering a DevOps culture, how do you equate that to a figure? And at the same time, now that we've taken responsibility of, you know, choking the neck of the person that works within the organization that's looking after the data center and the racks, now we can choke the neck of the actual service provider, because you're paying them a fee to make sure that service is up 99.999 and the rest set at a time. So you start moving some of this responsibility away and freeing up your time. Again, all these things are hard to sort of gauge as a figure, but what you want to at least have is a rough ballpark idea of, here is an application, here, this is how many servers it takes. If you were to move it to Azure, like for like, this is the cost of running them in Azure for 744 hours, and then from there you can decide what you want to do. Do you want to leave it as a like for like, or do you want to PaaS it, or do you want to maybe look for a software as a service offering for that particular application as well, and move away completely from that? So, you know, it gives you the power to make that choice, empowers you to have an idea, and at least leadership have some figures to go by. But there's a lot of caveats with those figures.
All right. We've kind of gone through most of our prepared statements, and we've kind of been answering some questions, you know, throughout. But I'm noticing another one that was specifically somebody from insurance, and he says he has, or he or she has many legacy apps that go back to the 60s even. Are there, and how do you measure the efficiency of moving to DevOps, or replacing or moving a legacy system into a DevOps platform? You know,
I guess you got to ask yourself, why is it a legacy system? What's holding you in that sort of holding pattern would be the first question I would ask. Sometimes you need to be the disruptor in the organization, and that is, you need to challenge the status quo and say, okay, these legacy apps, some of them just can't move. Let's just be honest, especially if they've been around from the 60s. So what you might find is this whole hybrid cloud model that everybody's sort of gearing towards, and that is, okay, we have hybrid for a multitude of reasons, but probably one of the two main ones is, I need my data and I want to be on-prem and I want to manage it. Therefore, I've got my on-prem private cloud. Great. That could be Azure Stack, or that could be something else. You can use VMware or whatever. But the thing is that you say, okay, so for data privacy protection and manageability, maybe I don't want to move my financial systems. The other thing is for legacy apps, because I know these apps can't move. unless otherwise it's going to cost a significant amount of money to move to either a new solution or you know, rebuild, refactor, repurpose, whatever it may be, this legacy application. So a line in the sand has to be drawn. But if you think that you can just move a legacy app or something that's somewhat, I'm going to say, hey, because you know, if it's been around for that long, it's organically grown over time. Those sort of systems are highly customized, touch sort of systems that you provide the bullet and say, look, you know, that's going to stay where it is, and we're going to sunset it at some point, and we're going to put it in our IT strategy or our business strategy to move to a new service. It could be a SaaS-based financial system service for that reason. So you have these opportunities to actually be disruptive in your organization and talk to your leadership, even though they might not like what they hear. It's the reality of moving to cloud. You can't fit a circle into a star, so to speak. The shapes don't match up, and so you just have to understand that some things just have to be left behind.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I'll cry. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I think that we pretty much covered everything we wanted to, so if there are any more questions, you know, feel free to throw them out there. Otherwise, appreciate everybody joining and for taking time to spend some time with me and Rob. And hope you have an awesome rest of your day. All right, thanks a lot.